Well, welcome to our Read Aloud. We have a very distinguished guest today from the Department of English. She's a distinguished professor, Vice Chair of the Department of English, and Director of Project Narrative. This is Dr. Robyn Warhol. And she's going to read from two of her own works, and I'll let her tell you about them and decide which one she's going to present first.
Sure. Thank you very much for
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming. It's great that you guys are here. I understand that this series does not usually feature professors reading from their scholarly work because, of course, that sounds like it would be very dry. And I admit that an awful lot of what we do is very dry, very abstract. But I'm a feminist scholar, and to me, part of what feminism has brought to academia is an insistence on not always thinking abstractly, but about thinking through the body and thinking about how it feels to do scholarship and about how it feels to occupy a body in 21st century, gendered, sex, class, and race America. And so the two pieces that I'm going to be reading to you are both, you'll see signs of that influence of feminism on them. They're very much about the body. It's not the only thing I read about, but I thought it would be what might be most entertaining for you. So the first piece I'm going to read is from a book that I published a while ago. Before I was a professor here, I published this at the Ohio State University Press, and in a series actually that Professor Phelan co-edits. And the book is called Having a Good Cry, Effeminate Feelings and Pop Culture Forms. And what I'm going to read for you is part of the preface to the book, which is called Six Readers Reading and Feeling. I'm going to read you four of the readers. I'll skip the more academic ones. Reading is a physical act. Depending on how you look at it, reading is also a cognitive activity, a psychological process, a political engagement, an intertextual encounter, an aesthetic exercise, an academic discipline, a communitarian endeavor, a spiritual practice, a habit. But whatever else it may entail, reading always happens in and to a body. What is the somatic experience of taking in a narrative text? How does reading feel? The question's been asked so seldom, hardly any literary critical language exists for answering. Novelists and poets are adept at describing the physical manifestations of emotional reaction, the subtle and dramatic contortions of facial features, the flexing and the lucidity of muscles, the sensations in skin and bone and internal organs generated by what we call feelings. Sometimes literary authors even articulate the bodily reactions that they have to other authors' texts, as when the poet A.E. Housman said that, I quote, "Poetry indeed seems to be more physical than intellectual. Experience has taught me, when I'm shading of a morning, to keep watch over my thoughts, because if a line of poetry strays into my memory, my skin bristles so that the razor ceases to act. This particular symptom is accompanied by a shiver down the spine. There's another, which consists in a constriction of the throat and a precipitation of water to the eyes." Hausman might not have put it this way, but that tightness in the throat and wetness in the eye are the prelude to what I call having a good cry. Literary theorists and critics, unlike poets and novelists, do not often get beyond abstract categories in discussing what we call reader response. We talk so little about the affects that reading generates in our bodies, we're hardly aware of their repeated familiar existence. In conversations and correspondence with colleagues, students, and friends over the past many years, I've tried to push them into consciousness of their bodily reactions to the genres that they habitually read, as I've tried to find literary theoretical formulations of those reactions. The following vignettes reveal my most responsive interlocutors' best efforts at describing what reading feels like to them. Pulling against abstractions like I was moved or I felt great, these accounts reflect avid readers' own reports of what their bodies do when they are reading. As each vignette inevitably reveals the strain of trying to articulate the physical experience of reading, it indicates the purpose of this book to find a language for talking about the reader's body. Some of these are readers of novels, and some of them are readers of films. So reader number one. A woman in her late 20s reflects on her physical reactions to reading a Dickens novel for a graduate course where it's been assigned its serial parts. Quote, I've had some out loud chuckles and some occasions of my eyes opening wider, or maybe it's my eyebrow rising when something surprising happens. She reports a feeling of shock at an unexpected twist in the plot. Quote, I had a distinct physical response, kind of a sigh or a change in my breathing. I looked up from the page even though there was no one in the room to share the experience with. I think I smiled too. End quote. The act of reading registers in her lungs, her rib cage, her pectoral muscles, with that change in her breathing. It registers on her face as well. If no one sees her upturned lips, her raised eyebrow, her widened eyes, she feels them just the same. Even if she were somehow to experience no emotional turbulence outside of her reading of books, a lifetime of such surprises would etch lines in her now smooth forehead. The repeated smile would leave tiny lines at the edges of her mouth, and in that space where the skin is particularly thin, between the corner of her eye and her cheekbone. Reader number 2. I forgot to say also television viewers. A longtime viewer of a daily soap opera that's now defunct and was on the air for something like 60 years, As the World Turns, watches a videotaped episode, as he has done continually for more than a decade since he was in his early 30s. He tunes in reluctantly this time, still sore from the recent, as it turned out, temporary departure of his favorite actress, Elizabeth Hubbard, whom he feels has made the serial worth watching for so many years. Taking advantage of the time shifting that his VCR makes possible, he scans for the scenes that might pique his interest. As he watches, he feels angry, missing Hubbard's presence and resenting the proliferation of, quote, cast members who couldn't act their way out of a paper bag, end quote. He pouts, smirks, and rolls his eyes. His anger shades into contempt. His smirk gives way to a curled lip, which shades into boredom, experienced as physical and mental restlessness. Quote, while I'm watching, he reports, I'm also flipping through the pages of the magazine, eating, staring out of the window, wondering whether I should go buy a shirt, etc. The boredom, though, does not signify an absence of feelings. As the viewer puts it, quote, this boredom and distraction are inseparable from a certain low-level anxiety, a sense that I'm wasting my time, an eagerness for the scene I'm watching to be over, even a vague, pathetic hope that somehow Elizabeth Hubbard will appear again, as though her firing and departure were all just a bad dream. And of course, given the propensity of television serials to write off bad storyline decisions in just exactly that way, the anxious viewer's hope, vague and pathetic though it may be, is hardly unrealistic. That vague hope phases into a sense of hurt, as he says, a sense that, along with Hubbard, I myself had been fired by the show, more or less violently excluded from its imagined audience, which makes the viewer feel still more anger, more pouting, more eye-rolling, more smirking. The viewer's eyes have something else to do, though, besides rolling with disdain. He admits that, quote, finally, emerging out of a mild curiosity as to how the show has changed since I in effect said, you can't fire me, I quit, he feels, quote, an equally mild interest in the new male personnel, in particular a new punk, somehow associated with the character Julia. I thought at first he might be a recast Jack, but no, it's another generic gym buddy who I size up in the usual way, eyes vaguely creasing face and body, then see nothing special, moving on to the next object, in this case, the ridiculously dated haircut of another recast male character. The curiosity and the interest are only mild. The sizing up of it is nothing special. And so, concludes this reviewer, quote, with the late Anthony Newley, I cry, stop the world, I want to get off. The viewer records this series of sensations as an example of how he typically feels while watching what he calls his soap. Dissatisfied as he seems, he will almost certainly tune in again. The globe spinning in space that has served for decades as the soap's logo has not made its last turn on his television screen. The anger, the hope, the contempt, the hurt, the distraction, the anxiety, and even the boredom are as much a part of his customary viewing as the mild curiosity and the equally mild interest in maybe seeing something special, maybe even Elizabeth Hubbard, or some really compelling hunt, someone worth looking at. The pout, the curled lip, the smirk, the rolled eye are all part of the habit. They map his body's participation in his daily reading of the soap. Reader number 5, A lawyer verging on 40, sits by himself at a first-run screening of Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. His wife has asserted the effeminate prerogative of flinching from a notoriously violent movie and has refused to see it. His children, only newly adolescent, are too young to have come along with him to this celebrated but R-rated film. He notices that other people in the theater, including some teenage girls sitting behind him, are seated in the same posture he is assumed, slouched down in their seats, with their feet up on the backs of the chairs ahead of them, and their knees in their faces. His body's comfortable that way. It's his characteristic posture when he's alone in his office, chatting on the telephone. Now, he is not talking. He's concentrating on the film, and on how it is making him feel. Absorbed in what he experiences as the film's intensity, he's been completely taken in by Spielberg's camera, which has zoomed in at the beginning on the eyeball of an old World War II veteran visiting a military graveyard, then zoomed out to suggest that the eye belongs to the Tom Hanks character, through whose point of view he understands the subsequent scenes to be focalized. This gives the viewer confidence that Hanks's character will survive the many bloody episodes that make up the narrative. The sense of confidence has a calming effect on his agitation whenever Hanks's character faces imminent danger. The lawyer is moved by the violent action. He surprises himself with the depth of his gratification at seeing representations of German soldiers being killed. He thinks of this as, quote, just what the movie wants you to want, end quote, and he connects it with an attitude he recognizes as nostalgia for something he never experienced directly, but knows only through popular cultural formulations of a patriotic past. As he says, the last time we were all together behind one thing, fighting evil. It's a tremendous feeling. His excitement during the penultimate scene, where Hanks' mission to rescue Matt Damon's character, Private Ryan, is accomplished, culminates in a strongly felt surprise when the Hanks character is killed, proving the viewer's sense of confidence in the outcome to have been false. That old man's eye on which Spielberg's camera trick pivots belongs to Private Ryan, after all. As the scene flashes forward again in an aged Matt Damon, agonizing over whether his life has adequately compensated Tom Hanks' sacrifice, sobs over the military grave. The lawyer feels himself beginning to cry. Crying is something he says he almost never does in real life, though it happens sometimes while he reads touching passages from children's books aloud to his family. A wave of sensation wells up from behind his breastbone to someplace in his head. His eyes begin to water, and if anyone were to speak to him, his voice would crack in answer because of the tightness in his throat. As he is among strangers, he need not speak. He takes no pains to conceal his tears because the signs of his crying are so faint, no one would see them. Especially in this darkened theater, he runs no risk of appearing effeminate. Theater number 6. I am in a small crowded theater on a sub-zero Saturday night in downtown Burlington, Vermont, watching Wag the Dog for the first time. The audience is appreciative, though I notice I'm the only one who laughs at the jokes about Los Angeles. The film script, co-written by David Mamet, and just as cynical, rapid-fire, and ironic as I expect his work to be, speaks to many of my current preoccupations with pop culture and its formulas. The movie's premise is that you can distract the U.S. public from a White House sex scandal by fabricating reports of a war in, as they say, some obscure country like Albania. The film suggests that if you mobilize the appropriate technologies of feeling, including news footage, like the computer-enhanced, entirely fictive video they make of a young girl running from a burning building, clutching a stricken-looking cat, which actually is a bag of Tostitos before the computer makes the substitution, and pop songs, such as the ones they fabricated for the film, a kind of feel-good patriotic song that sounds just like We Are the World, We Are the Children, a pseudo-military pop anthem that uses the rhythms and harmonies of the Ballad of the Green Berets, sung from the 60s, and the very authentic sounding fake imitation of a 1930s blues number that they call Good Old Shoe, which is complete with hisses and pops that you would hear on an old vinyl record. And popular fads, like the one that is dreamed up in the film by a professional fad king that involves throwing old tennis shoes over power lines and into trees and having them hang by their laces. You can make U.S. audiences feel what film's point could not be more explicit. When the fictional U.S. president objects to a speech he must read on the grounds that it is too corny, his handlers ask that 30 quote-unquote secretaries be gathered in the Oval Office for a trial reading of the speech. Once Dustin Hoffman, as the Hollywood producer who's been called in to help the president through this crisis of image, has finished performing the speech, every one of the secretaries, all of them women, not coincidentally, is sobbing, even though the speech makes no reference to anything real or true within the world of the story. Following this strategy, the president will be reelected despite the sex scandal. Of course, the speech is too corny, the film suggests, and of course it works. Every one of those secretaries is having